The Sphinx is 12,000 years old, not 4,500. We have all been lied to, and we can prove it. The mainstream narrative is we're a product of a linear line of progression from the ancient Sumerians to the nasty, filthy world we live in now. Denzel Curry reference. Our ancient ancestors practiced isolationism and never once made contact. The insane megaliths that would prove almost impossible to recreate today were made with just copper and stone tools, using ramps and pulleys to move 1 to 200 ton rocks into methodical positions with accuracy we could only recreate with lasers today. Any other idea outside of this mainstream narrative is met with ridicule and heavy amounts of suppression, and this is not science. But we're talking about the Sphinx, so how is the Sphinx built? Well, if you ask the Smithsonian, the Sphinx was not assembled piece by piece, but was carved from a single mass of limestone exposed when workers dug a horseshoe-shaped quarry in the Giza Plateau. The Sphinx is 66 feet tall and 240 feet long. It is one of the largest and oldest monolithic structures in the world. It would have taken about 3 years for 100 workers to complete this task. And why was the Sphinx even built? Well, if you ask the Smithsonian, Khafre built it to protect his father's pyramid, Khufu, the Pyramid of Giza, even though no mummy has ever been found in the Pyramid of Giza. What is mainstream academia's evidence for this 2500 BC date? I'm glad you asked. The earliest historical records and inscriptions found in the vicinity of the Sphinx date to the New Kingdom period. We do not have the full picture, so this is decent evidence. It's not just a pure assumption. They're stringing together past ancient tellings and records to come to a conclusion. The Great Sphinx is located in close proximity to the pyramid complex of Khafre. The Valley Temple adjacent to the Sphinx is associated with Khafre, and the statues of the pharaoh were found there. The similarities between the center court of the Sphinx Temple and the mortuary temple of Khafre suggest a close connection. So pretty much what they're saying is there's very similar structures and buildings to the Sphinx, so this is a pure assumption that there is a connection between the Sphinx and these other structures. So I'd call this an L-tag. The facial features of the Sphinx show a resemblance to the portraits and statues of Khafre found in other Egyptian art. Facial analysis by experts have suggested that the face on the Sphinx is consistent with the facial features of people of Africa, matching the ethnicity of ancient Egyptians. Now, mainstream academia could have came up with a way better reasoning and supporting evidence than just a resemblance. This is pure assumption. An absence of a lost civilization is evidence to the 2500 BC date, because if there's no civilization with the resources to build the Sphinx, then who built it? That means it was built on this date. Absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. There's many factors on why there's zero evidence. 1, the suppression of information. 2, the lack of research due to the stigma. And 3, yesterday oceans are today's land. And we've explored like 1% of the ocean. We just simply don't know. Opponents of the older Sphinx theory argue that the weathering patterns on the Sphinx can be explained by various factors other than extreme rainfall. Now, it's quite peculiar that the one objective piece of evidence that exists on the age of Sphinx indicate an age much older than once thought, and it would have to be a massive anomaly to fit the mainstream narrative. The age of a lot of nearby structures to the Sphinx date back to the New Kingdom, so Egyptologists are like, okay, that is next to that, so they're the same age. Bad assumption argument. Now, the final piece of evidence is that most experts and Egyptologists believe it to be dated to this date. This is an echo chamber, not a piece of evidence, and is purely just not science. I want to take a quick moment to talk about the difference in erosion, as I'm no geologist or expert in erosion, but I think we could all learn together and push these ideas to the new frontier. Wind erosion is much more rough by the edges, and erosion from a flowing body of water wouldn't have the vertical lines of erosion. This is either precipitation erosion, which would date the Sphinx to around 10,000 BC, the last time the conditions were met in Africa to produce such erosion, or this is the greatest anomaly ever seen in erosion. Now, this is the fun shit. This is the evidence of a pre-Younger Dryas civilization. So as we've discussed, Robert Schoch, I still don't know how to say his last name, and John Anthony West proposed that the weathering patterns suggest a much older date than the mainstream narrative. This is the absolute best piece of data we have. Seismic measurements have shown different amounts of weathering depending on the side of the Sphinx you're looking on. We're going to dive deeper into this later. Then there's the contrasting erosion from the monuments and other megaliths around the Sphinx. The Sphinx has very different erosion from everything else that we know dates back to the New Kingdom. And there's been so many records found in Egypt of repairs of the Sphinx, and you gotta think, if there's so many repairs throughout history, why would it be needed if it was only 4,000 years old? And the narrative we've already gone over, Khafre building it to protect his father's tomb, well, there's a problem with that. There's written record that Khufu stumbled upon the house of the Sphinx, implying it existed during his lifetime. This fundamentally breaks the mainstream narrative of history. Now, I'm gonna try my best to where we can both learn about the seismic measurements. Seismic networks detect ground motion recorded as seismographs. The most reliable data comes from sensitive seismometers installed below ground. These instruments sense and measure vibrations in the earth and around them and record the amplitude of those vibrations over time. And then in the article, it begins to talk about how seismic measurements have shown that there's 50 to 100% more weathering on the 3 other sides on the west side of the Sphinx, and the west side of it would presumably go back to the New Kingdom period. And if these anomalies are non-linear, it could indicate the 3 sides, not the west, being much, much older than we once thought. Now, this final piece of evidence towards a 12,000-year-old Sphinx is kind of tinfoil hat-ish. But after this, we will compare both sides and both perspectives, and then we're going to give an analysis. I was going to add suppression of information, but that deserves its own video. Just know a lot of this information has been suppressed. Now, the full Edgar Cayce story is up on my channel if you want to know the validity of this man. I still didn't do him complete justice, but in the future that justice will be done by me. It would take over 2 hours to explain how Edgar Cayce is the best evidence for psychic phenomena, but Edgar Cayce claimed that the Sphinx was 12,000 years old, not 4,500. He claimed that there would be an underground passageway found under the left paw of the Sphinx. He claimed this in 1993, 3 years before any evidence indicating this would come out. In this underground passageway would contain the records of the true origins of humanity. And in 1994, seismic measurements from Robert Schaff proved that there is an unexplored chamber under the left paw of the Sphinx. Very peculiar. So now let's compare evidence. Okay, so everything is based on assumption other than the erosion and seismic result, which both happen to favor the 10,000 BC date. Now, the repairs and the misconceptions in the Egyptian time could be chalked up to a number of anomalies. But there is one thing for certain: the so-called conspiracy theory has a lot more logic and evidence going towards it than the mainstream narrative in history. So that leads me to my one question: why is there so much opposition? Who controls the past controls the future. Who controls the present controls the past. What does this mean? The finding of an ancient advanced civilization that existed 12,000 years ago would fundamentally change everything we know about the human experience. We would not be the apex of human achievement. This alone could change how we view ourselves, and our priorities would come into question. A lot of humanity's greatest mysteries would either be answered or the ball would begin rolling. This may solve the mental health crisis us as a species are currently in. It is much easier to control and maximize profit from us, the masses, when we are a species with amnesia. I think it would take a great perspective change for any strides to unity being possible, and I think the lost ancient advanced civilization discovery would be that perspective change. Every single culture tells of tales of every single culture has tales of time before the moon, man with gods and a utopia in Agartha. The Sumerians tell of the Anunnaki who created the human race. All ancient tales and religions seem to draw on a similar source. We get the tale of Atlantis from the ancient Greek philosopher Plato, but what a lot of people don't know is it was passed down as an oral tradition that a Greek lawmaker, Solomon, went to Egypt to consult with a high priestess, and she told him of many civilization resets in the past. So if we truly zoom out and think in perspective, what are the mathematical odds with all the evidence we've discovered in our modern times, along with just the odds being on our side of past civilization resets? I hope to one day in my life be able to calculate those odds. Now, is this all wishful thinking with the certain narrative mainstream academia has set and teaches in school, the suppression of information towards alternate theories, the inability to simply raise questions without being attacked or reputation being destroyed? Graham Hancock's a perfect example. Could all of this result in the opposite idea being taken and cherry-picked? Could it simply be the ignorance of our government and academia, or the myriad of other possibilities? The amount of possible combinations of events resulting in our present day is incomprehensible. One question: why is there so much pushback when we simply don't know? What is the purpose of this pushback? Is something being hidden? I simply want to stay as objective as possible. I don't care if there's a lost civilization, I purely want the truth. But the problem is, the water is so muddy, we don't know fact from fiction. That's how people go off the deep end and end up like Alex Jones. And it was so hard making this video. I have all the ideas in my head, but converting it to a YouTube video is so hard. But that's what this series is. Learning together and solving humanity's greatest mysteries together, pushing these ideas to new frontiers through community and unity, where every perspective is infinitely valued. The Discord will be coming soon. Real quick, last slide on the PowerPoint. This is purely about the Sphinx, but Göbekli Tepe dates back to 10,000 BC and completely breaks our understanding of history and shows a possible civilization with the means to carve out the Sphinx. And it possibly shows a transfer of knowledge from a previous advanced civilization, one that would be an advance in understanding of themselves and nature. The lost civilization would answer a lot of the anomalies in history that point towards that conclusion, and the possibility are endless on the meaning of life and other cool shit. This would be the civilization that built the pyramids and Sphinx, but after the younger dryas transferred their knowledge all over the globe, explaining the similarities in every culture and seemingly drawing from one source. That's my TED Talk, why the Sphinx is 12,000 years old, not 4,500. I've put the most work into this video that I have in any other video. It has driven me crazy, and the feeling of success and motivation I'm feeling right now for finishing it, the fulfillment is off the fucking charts. The quality is only going to infinitely increase from here, boys. Stick along for the journey. You're all infinitely valuable, and have an amazing day.